Welcome back to another review session for the Texas PPR exam. Today we're going to discuss Competency 11, Increasing Parental Involvement in Schools. This will be beneficial for anyone studying for the Texas PPR exam and also any of my students in my Educational Foundations class. First, let's begin by going over some seminal educational research that supports our understanding of the need for parental involvement. The Coleman Report in 1966 was an essential research investigation that found that parental engagement in schools was a key factor in students' academic success. Other beneficial findings from the Coleman Report that we've talked about in earlier review sessions included the report that found that socioeconomic status and neighborhood played an important role in students' educational outcomes. Another thing that the Coleman Report determined was that low-income students especially benefit from attending classrooms and schools with middle-class and upper-class students. And the reason why is because middle-class and upper-class students were more likely to receive coaching from their parents on how to attend college and how to obtain a professional job. And so if lower-income students received the influence from their friends and their friends' parents of learning more about college and the economic system, then this was leading to increase social mobility and educational opportunities for low-income students. Another important finding from the Coleman Report was that students benefit from being in racially diverse and culturally diverse backgrounds. And so I advise you to check out that research because it was really important and it helped shape our understanding of schools today. So let's talk about some other research findings. So Bianchi and Robinson found that parental expectations was explicitly linked to children's academic achievement. So basically, high parental expectations and high expectations on their children's academics led to their children actually accomplishing more academically. So parents' perspective and expectations of their children contributed to their children's educational attainment. Henderson and Burla also found that when parental involvement increased, so did graduation rates, the percentage of students that completed homework, and also attendance rates. So parental involvement had a significant impact on all areas of schooling. Another finding from Clark noted that most parents want to be involved in their students' education. So unfortunately, some people have a misconception that certain groups of parents or certain types of parents are, because they are not always seen in schools, do not want to be involved or do not value that education is important. This has been proven by research to be false. Just as Clark demonstrated, parents want to be involved in their students' education, but we'll talk about it, there might be some barriers that exist. Another thing that Banks found was that low-income parents especially view education as important because they view education as a means for students to improve their social and economic opportunities. Low-income parents see the direct link between higher amounts of education and increased quality of life. So low-income parents value education just as much as high-income parents. It's just a matter of having the resources and the opportunities to be engaged in school. And we're going to talk about that, how you as an educator can support parents of all socioeconomic backgrounds, of all cultures, and all races to be engaged in your classroom. So first, let's talk about some of the unfortunate barriers to parental involvement. First, we're going to talk about structural barriers on the parents' side of things that prevent some parents from being engaged. One thing that unfortunately limits parental engagement could be work schedules. So many parents have to work long hours, overtime, or they work night shifts, or they just work different times of the day, or they might be looking for work. And so when they have unusual work schedules that are not fitting to the regular school day, which is generally from 8 to 4 in the United States, many of these parents cannot be involved in their child's education during the traditional school day. Other times, parents might feel insecure themselves about their own lack of education, or they might even have negative educational memories. So maybe they had memories of their own academic failures or their own struggles. Also, they could also have negative memories in terms of maybe discipline that they received, or maybe they've had negative relationships with particular school administrators or teachers. Many times, parents might also feel insecure because they may or may not speak English fluently. And so if parents are still learning English or they do not have full English proficiency, they might be uncomfortable communicating in the mainstream American classroom where the majority of the conversation and communication is in English. Some other barriers to parental involvement come from the schools. One issue is that many schools and many educators, unfortunately, do a poor job of communicating with parents. They either provide a lack of communication or they communicate with parents in an ineffective way. So maybe they're communicating with them through traditional ways like the phone or through mail when parents might not have those resources or might not respond to the mail or to landline phone calls. Also, sometimes schools fail to demonstrate fail to demonstrate concern for individual students and their educational outcomes. You might see this a lot in these in some of these schools that have really strong, rigid discipline structures, or they have very tough expectations for their students. If they don't demonstrate a concern for getting to know each individual student and getting to know their families, parents will likely have less of an interest to want to be engaged in the schools because they don't feel invited. Another thing that schools unfortunately often fail to do is accommodate parents' various work schedules. We've talked about that already, but many schools, if you think about it, often have school events in which parents can attend and parent-teacher conferences during the traditional school day, 8 to 4. And occasionally there might be some parent engagement nights, but those are normally in the evenings from 5 to 6. Well, if a parent is working during those times, they would not be able to participate. Another thing is many schools fail to recognize the local community's culture, their traditions, their history, and their goals. They might not understand important cultural communication practices or cultural traditions, cultural ceremonies that are very meaningful to the community, that students might miss school occasionally to attend those cultural traditions or ceremonies. But if the school has for example, a very rigid attendance policy and punishes students for attending these cultural traditions, then that could leave a bad taste in the mouth of parents. Another issue is that many schools don't offer sufficient translators in parents' native languages. Or they might not hire enough diverse staff, so parents don't see teachers like themselves in the schools, and they don't see teachers who speak their native language. And so not only do they have the difficulty of communicating, but they also feel like there's a cultural barrier, that the school is a separate entity than what they're used to. Another thing is many times, unfortunately, educators use ineffective communication practices. Primarily, they often rely a lot on technical jargon. If you think about it, in education, we use a lot of abbreviations. LEP, ELL, STAR, TEACS, ELPS, ARD, SPED. There's tons of technical jargon. And many times, since educators are used to communicating with each other using that technical jargon, when they communicate with other adults, parents, they forget that parents might not be aware of that technical jargon. Also, sometimes teachers just might use very erudite academic vocabulary that parents might not understand or might not be accustomed to, and so that can put off some parents who are feeling like the teacher is trying to either make them look bad, or they're talking above their head, or maybe they just might be confused. They just don't understand what the teacher is saying. Now we're going to talk about how we can improve parental involvement. So first thing is to demonstrate to your parents that their input matters. So solicit their feedback. Provide opportunities for them to communicate with you, sending you an email or calling you or coming to visit you. Have it maybe a suggestion box, or maybe even send out a request for parental ideas for classroom activities or classroom ceremonies. So soliciting parents' input and their feedback is important. So not only asking for it, but also acting on it. So if a parent has a concern and it's a legitimate concern, you need to follow through with that as an educator. And you also probably need to follow up with that parent and tell them, hey, I appreciate your comments and your concerns. I have done this, this, and this to address the issue. Parents will really appreciate that, and they'll see that you view them as a partner in their children's academic success. Another thing that's important is create an open door policy. So this is not, of course, during instructional time. You don't want parents coming into your class in the middle of a lesson, which could interrupt the lesson, but before school, after school, during your conference time, which many districts set aside for you to meet with parents, tell parents of your availability, be available for them when you say you're going to be there, and have an open door policy where parents feel welcome to come in and ask you questions. Another way is to support two-way communication between yourself, the educator, and parents. And so there's various ways. Email, maybe having a school or class Twitter account or Facebook account that's based just for educational purposes. There's different applications with your phones that help facilitate parent-teacher contact, such as the Remind app that sends reminders, or the Class Dojo application, or maybe even there's different applications where the teacher can send a text message without sharing their personal cell phone number. Of course, there's the traditional phone calls and in-person communication. Many times, parents pick up their children from school or drop them off. So you, as an educator, can make an effort to talk to those parents during those times. Or if really needed, you could also do home visits if you're really struggling to contact a parent or to understand a parent. And if you do those home visits, make sure you do it with another educator, ideally your administrator, and make sure the parent is expecting you. Don't just show up unannounced. And of course, make sure it's a safe environment. You don't want to do a home visit during an inopportune time that might not be very safe for you, or might lead to both groups being uncomfortable. Another thing is invite parents to ask questions. So when you send home correspondence, like a class letter, or you call parents, or you have parent engagement nights, or parent meetings, or open houses, reserve a time for parents to ask questions and encourage them to ask questions. Also, make sure you find a way to regularly communicate with parents, especially about important happenings in the school and in the classroom. So at the beginning of the year, it's very important you send home a letter telling parents about your classroom rules, your routines, your classroom homework policy, maybe makeup work policy, your discipline system, and how parents can contact you and how parents can help their children at school. So many times this involves sending home a list of useful educational websites that parents can work with their children on to help support their learning. Also, in general, at least weekly, you should send home a report to parents, some form of communication. It could be a written report, or it could be a phone call, it could be a text message through those Remind apps, or through Class Dojo, which is another application to communicate with parents. But you want to send home information about what were the main assignments that week, how students performed overall, like so how did their children do on those assignments, and also students' behavior. So if parents have regular communication from the teacher, then they'll be less likely to complain, and there'll be less issues overall from discipline, because parents are ideally helping you, the educator, with reinforcing the discipline and the classroom management and the homework policies at home. Also, going back to what we just mentioned, make sure you also send home regular notification about important events in the school. Parents want to know, when is open house? When is this parent engagement night? When can they purchase pictures, for example, if there's a picture day, or school t-shirts, things like that. You want to inform parents. Book fairs. Another way you can support parental involvement is by encouraging your parents to volunteer. So if you see that there's a parent with a positive attitude and wants to help out, encourage them to come into your classroom and support you. Of course, you want to make sure that they become approved volunteers. You want to go through your district's volunteer process. You want to make sure they have their background check and everything like that. But once they've gotten background checked and they're approved volunteers, find skills that they feel comfortable doing and that they are interested in doing, and then they can help volunteer. So sometimes this could be maybe parents, while you're working during your remediation time with students, you're working with your groups that need additional support, you might have a parent help work with the enrichment group and make sure that they're on task and support them. Or you might have parents, while you're reading with one group of students, they're reading with another group of students. Or of course, you can have parents do some of those important classroom management tasks, like organizing papers, maybe organizing the classroom, making sure that all students have access to technology. One thing to note, though, is with parents, you want to make sure you ensure students' confidentiality. So you don't want parents grading your papers. You don't want parents seeing any personal information about other students. You only want parents to be working in a professional capacity and respecting your students' privacy and confidentiality. Another way that's very important, and that's really kind of like a win-win situation to easily get parental involvement, is to build rapport from day one with your parents. And an easy way to do that is to send home positive communication from maybe at least by the first week of school. I would even send home letters to parents before school even started, introducing myself and discussing how happy I was to have their children in my classroom. So as much as possible, you want to build that positive relationship by sending home some form of positive communication. So at the first week, maybe send an about you letter, or send home a letter welcoming them to your classroom and giving them your rules and your expectations and your homework policy. Calling parents. I would sometimes, especially my first year teaching, I actually called every single parent the first weekend after the first week of school to call them and make a personal contact with them and to introduce myself, and also to say how once again, how excited and eager I was to be their child's teacher. And you want to build that positive relationship because eventually you might, unfortunately, have to send home some negative communication. But if your first point of contact was positive, they trust you, they feel confident that you care and you're interested and you really want to help their children. If you develop that positive first impression, then later when you really need parents' support with, you might have to send home a negative letter, or you might have to call home and talk about a behavior issue or maybe poor performance on homework. If parents trust you and have a positive impression of you overall from your first contact, then they're more likely to accept and support your feedback even when it's negative. Another important way to engage parents is to have formal family engagement nights. And these often school districts even require, and especially if you end up working at a Title I school district, they're actually required to have one a year at least, and to document these parent engagement nights. So parent engagement nights are not just opportunities for parents to come in and look at all the nice work that students did. Parent engagement nights also involve parents actively being involved in learning instructional tools to support their children at home, learning instructional techniques, learning about the assignments that are going on, sharing their culture, engaging with their students in academic activities like reading or writing activities or math games. And so some examples of parent engagement nights could be content-based nights, like you could have a science night. My elementary school, we always had a reading under the stars night where we would have parents come in and they would have a telescope, and parents and students could look at the telescopes and look at the stars. And then we have blankets where they could sit and read books with their children. We had different math activity nights where parents learned math games that they could do with cards and dice and math flashcards, and we gave them some of those tools that they could practice at home. You could have, of course, fine arts nights where parents come and hear school concerts, and another wonderful thing is to have cultural events. So having maybe a Black History Month event, or having a Cinco de Mayo event, or an Asian Lunar New Year event in which parents are invited to share their culture, their history, and their traditions, while also recognizing their culture's importance and influence by recognizing their culture during those important times of the year. Of course, there's also the traditional Meet the Teacher night that you do at the beginning of the year, and also open house nights. And even as a teacher, even if your school-wide open house is, let's say, in March, which is the tradition for many schools in Texas, you can still have your classroom open house night with the approval of your administrator on your own time. You could have one once a month. You could even have a class performance day or a class academic product day where students share their work, their posters, their projects, maybe their reader's theater they practiced, or their music they've learned, or to demonstrate to their parents their journals. Now let's go into parent-teacher conferences, because this is also another specific way to involve parents. Different districts have different regulations on parent-teacher conferences. Some require them every 6 weeks, some require them once a semester, some require them once a year. Regardless of what is the policy, make sure you become aware of that policy and you follow it, of course. And you always want to document your parent-teacher conferences. So make sure most districts have a formal documentation system. When you join the district, make sure you inform yourself of how you are supposed to document parent-teacher conferences. And if for some reason they don't have a documentation system, create your own, because you never know when you might need to supply that documentation to your administrator, or maybe even remind your parents, hey, I did talk to you about this on this date. we did meet about this. So it's always important to have documentation. Make sure that when you have your parent-teacher conferences that you have a mutual tone of respect. And you might even start out the conference on that note. You might say, "Hi, I'm here today because I really care about your child. I've really enjoyed having her or him in my class, and I like this element of this child, like maybe their interest, their passion for learning, their dedication to schoolwork, their creativity." Find something positive to begin with, and then shift toward your goals for the conference. And one of your goals is that you want to translate and transmit your tone of respect and your interest in making a positive relationship with that parent. So ensure, and you might discuss this with parents, you might even agree, like, let's make some norms for our conference. How could we make this conference successful? You could even ask them, and then maybe you can agree upon having a mutual tone of success, of respect, working for common goals, working for the best of the child, things like that. Often, another thing to do at the beginning of a conference is try to learn more about that family. Get to know who's in that family. Now, don't ask, personal, awkward questions like, "How many times have you been married?" Or you don't want to ask too many personal questions, but it's okay to ask, who's in your family? What are some of your traditions? What are some cultural foods or ceremonies that you find really important? What kind of books do you like to read with your children? What kind of activities do you all do for fun as a family? So get to know them. Another thing is, during the conference, make sure that you inform parents directly of what are the school expectations and rules, and also your classroom expectations, also your classroom procedures, your homework policy, how the schedule of your day, how you structure activities, how do you support your students in small groups, for example, when you have to reteach information. So just make them aware of what goes on in the classroom, because sometimes even if you've sent home that welcome letter or you've even reminded them through a phone call, parents might not understand directly. So if you can physically show them, maybe by showing them a copy of your rules, or showing them a copy of their child's work and discussing the activity, or showing them their class schedule or the types of technology applications you all use in the classroom. All of these things will be beneficial for a parent to see firsthand what goes on in your classroom. Another thing is, when you are getting ready for your conference, you have to make sure you prepare ahead of time. So first of all, you need to make sure you contact parents and remind them of the conference. Sometimes parents forget, or sometimes parents might not have received the communication, especially if you sent home a written note to students. Some students might forget to give to their parents, or might purposefully hide that communication from their parents. So you want to directly communicate with the parent to inform them of your interest in having a conference, and also setting up a date with them. If needed, you might also need to prepare ahead of time to arrange for a translator. If you know the parent is a person who's still learning English and maybe would prefer to speak in their native language, and you know the native language of the parent, and that's pretty easy to do, you can just ask the child, what language do you speak at home, or what language does your parents prefer to communicate in? Once you find that out, you can arrange for a translator, and so that will be on hand, so you won't be have to interrupt the conference to go find someone. Or and it also shows that you, the educator, care about getting to know that parent and want to meet parents' needs and to recognize their native language and native culture. Another thing is, make sure you think of some positive notes to begin the meeting. So things that you found that have been successful with that student, or your appreciation for the parent meeting with you, your love for teaching and your goals for the student, how you want to see them be successful. Always start with a positive note. Because some parents might, unfortunately, they're used to parent-teacher conferences where they're just being told by the teacher all the things their children are doing wrong, and maybe indirectly all the things the parent is doing wrong. And so parents don't really want to hear that, even if they know their students might be struggling. They also want to hear good things about their children and about their parenting. So starting out on a positive note is really beneficial, because later, if you do have to have those hard conversations with parents about some issues that their students are having that are somewhat negative, then at least the parent knows that you cared enough to find something good to say about their kids. Another thing that's important is whatever you're going to talk about in the conference, make sure that you have that readily available. So I like to call this having data or firsthand documents available. So if you're going to talk about students' grades, like maybe they're not doing so well in your class, you need to provide parents with some examples of the student's grades, so graded work, and explain why the student is not being beneficial. Why the student's not being successful. If you're going to discuss your issues about a student's behavior, you need to find some kind of documentation of that student's behavior. Maybe the note the student wrote, or maybe your record of how many times you had to redirect that student, or the student not turning in their work or not completing their work. Have examples that you can provide to the parents to support your conclusion. Now, this is also important. If you are really concerned about the success of the meeting, like whether or not it's going to be a positive communication between you and the parent, whether or not both groups are going to remember the same details that were discussed in the conference, then it's okay to ask an administrator or a teammate to come listen in and support you. Especially if you feel concerned for your own welfare, or you're worried the parents might overreact, or parents might say that you, for some reason, did not communicate in a certain way effectively, then you want to invite your administrator so they are on board and they can also support you. Now, don't only do this if you're really concerned about a particular parent. Like, they have given you many hints that they're going to be difficult. I rarely had to do this. I don't think I ever had to do this, actually. And primarily it was because I developed that positive relationship with that positive communication first before I had to do more of the difficult conversations. Another thing is, make sure you have a note-taking device. You want to have some kind of documentation. And if parents give you permission, you might even want to record the meeting. But you want to take your own notes and have documentation of that the meeting occurred and what you talked about. This way, if there's any questions or any concerns later, you can review that documentation and even share. One great thing to do is you could even share your notes with the parent. Another thing is, set up a follow-up date. So even if you're telling the parent all the wonderful things their student is doing, and that's your parent-teacher conference, even if you're doing that, parents appreciate a follow-up. So they want to hear how their students are continuing to do. And most of the time, parent-teacher conferences address issues that the student is having. It could be grades, behavior, what have you. And so if you set up a follow-up date with the parent, then that's beneficial, because not only will you set up a follow-up date, but you can also have like an action plan that both groups have to do. So you as the teacher are going to work on this, this, and this to help the student. The student themselves are going to work on coming to class on time, completing their work, being respectful, whatever is your action plan for the student. The parent is going to also have an action plan for what they're going to do to support the student at home. So if you all three have responsibilities and an action plan to pursue, you can follow up at a later date to discuss how the student is doing in the classroom, if they're fulfilling their action plan, how you, the teacher, have fulfilled your responsibilities and your role, and what efforts you have taken to support that student. And also the parent can share with you how their support system at home has been going. Another thing to do is, if you're also trying to start out on a positive note, a nice way is to also not only ask about the family, their culture, their traditions, the languages they speak at home, but also some questions about the student themselves. What are their interests? What sports do they play? Or what are their hobbies? What do they like to do? What books do they read? What would they like to learn more about? What are their goals? What could be possible careers they might be interested in? What are parents' goals for their children? What do parents hope their children do in the future in terms of, what are their goals? Do they want them to graduate high school, go to college? Try to find out parents' goals and then talk about how your goals align with parents' goals and how you both the parents and you, the educator, can work together to make the student successful and to meet those goals. Another general recommendation is, for the most part, parent-teacher conferences are an opportunity for parents to become more engaged and more involved in the process. So in general, you probably want to listen more than talk. The most effective conferences are when the parents get to have an active voice and an active representation, and they get to really communicate their point of view. So as much as possible, make sure you're at least communicating. You're each equally spending time listening and talking, and as much as possible, you might even want to listen more than talk, so parents feel like their voice is heard. Another thing is, you can provide suggestions to reinforce positive behavior at home, but you don't want to give parenting advice. So you might suggest, your student, maybe you can give some positive rewards for your child if they do their homework, like maybe take them to the park or play outside with them, or give them some time to read the book of their choice, or even watch a TV program of their choice that's appropriate. But so you might give those kinds of suggestions, but you shouldn't tell them exactly how to discipline their child or how to talk to their child. That's the parents. That's not really the teacher's role. That's the parent's responsibility. Sometimes parents might ask you, they might say, hey, I have trouble controlling my kid at home, or I can't get them to do the homework. Well, you can provide some suggestions, some positive behavior supports, like some rewards they could give. Maybe you could even mention, I sometimes would say, well, if you really think your child's not listening to you and they're not completing what you're asking them to do, then it's okay to take away a privilege from the child, like maybe a video game or TV time or outdoor playing time. So it's okay to take a privilege away from the child, as long as you provide a mechanism for children to earn it back. So maybe after they finish their work, or they start behaving appropriately, or they have a good day at school, maybe you can give them back that privilege. So another thing to do is, on your first visit with a parent, you should not suggest that their child might need academic testing in terms of special education testing, or they might need psychological testing, like they have a behavior disorder or a psychological problem like depression. You shouldn't do that on the first visit. You really need to develop a relationship with the parent and have firm evidence before you can even suggest that. And you don't want to do that your first meeting with the parent, of course, but you want to make sure you consult with like the special ed teacher or coordinator, and also, or maybe even the school counselor, before you even mention those things to parents. Maybe even invite the school counselor or a special ed teacher to come into your classroom, come into the parent-teacher conference to help talk to the parent about possible needs for that student. So another thing to do is, a great way to involve parents is to encourage parents to join parent-teacher organizations like the PTA. This increases parent involvement. It also tells parents and gives parents a voice, like a choice and representation in the school's decisions. It also, parent-teacher organizations often provide opportunities for parents to volunteer, including providing fundraisers or community events for the school. So they're very beneficial. Also, you as a teacher should actively participate. Many times I would actually attend parent-teacher organizations like the PTA meeting, and I would get to know the parents who were on the PTA, even if they weren't my students' parents. And I would try to suggest things and participate in PTA events. That showed the parents and the community that I cared about their children, and I wasn't just there for the paycheck. I was there to really change lives for the better and to improve children's lives through educating them and supporting their academic, social, and emotional and professional development. So now another thing to do that we need to talk about is how can you support your parents to help their children at home? So there's different research on this, but research has shown that sometimes parents might not know exactly how to help their children at home, how to help them with homework, or what activities to do, or what supplemental enrichment activities they can provide. So you, the teacher, might need to actually show parents, hey, we're working on this in math, or we're working on this book, please read it with them. Or we're talking about this topic. Maybe you all could do some research on your own about this topic, or talk about it to your child about your own experiences with this topic. So research shows that when teachers support parents and teach parents how to be better teachers to their children, then parents are much more likely to help improve their students' academic performance. So teaching parents how to be teachers to their children is very beneficial. Also, parents become aware of what's going on in the classroom, and then they learn more they also will probably empathize more with you. Like they'll empathize with their child themselves about all the impressive things the children have to learn at each grade level. So teach parents practical skills and techniques and give them resources, books, websites, math games, language games, social studies activities for parents to work with their children. Research also shows that supporting parents' literacy, like parents' educational development, so teaching parents about content, about math, about science, about social studies, developing their language abilities, teaching them English, teaching them academic skills, GED classes for parents. All of those things translate into parents better helping their children at home and more student academic achievement. Another thing to do is you need to make sure that you make an effort to utilize parents' knowledge and expertise. Even if a parent does not have a strong formal academic background, they know things. They know things about their culture. They know things about their history, their family's history. They have experiences in the community. They have work experiences or professional experiences. They may have traveled to different places, or they may speak a different language that they could share with the classroom. They may also have background knowledge about important traditions or techniques, for example, with healthcare or with certain, maybe some arts and crafts or artisanal, artistic talents that parents might have. Make sure also that another way to incorporate parents' expertise is to encourage parents to work with their children at home. So make sure that you're saying it's okay to help them with homework. It's okay to help them with their reading. It's okay you should read with them. You should maybe pick a book that you can both read and enjoy together. You could also assign projects that parents can help the student complete, like having a family history project or an interview project where the student interviews their parent, or have a cultural traditions project where students write about their culture and their important traditions. Maybe have a parent-student reading journal where both the parents and the students write down something they liked about the book they read together. Or maybe they have a two-way journal where maybe the parent asks a question or writes down a response to their child, and then the child responds later in their journal. And they go back and forth based on what they've read. Also, invite parents to the classroom when it's appropriate. Invite them to talk about cultural traditions, their history, maybe their background cultural knowledge, their language, their jobs, their interesting things in their lives. You can also use parents' background knowledge. So if you have parents that are skilled seamstresses or skilled tailors, they could maybe help you with the class play and making the costumes. Maybe you might have some parents that are really good in landscaping. Maybe they can help you with the classroom garden. Or you might have parents that are lawyers. Maybe they can talk about their profession or about the court system or about civil rights. So there's various ways. Maybe their parents are farmers and they can help share with the class about the agricultural products and the soil and the climate of the region. Another thing to do is you can invite parents to join committees at your school. There's many committees that actually require parents' participation. One of them is the Language Proficiency Assessment Committee, which is the yearly committee that evaluates English language learners' progress. Other times we call it LPAC, just for short abbreviation. But the LPAC committee actually requires that at least one parent from the community is there to give their recommendation about students' placement in either ESL programs or bilingual programs, and to evaluate students' progress in their language development. Another thing is many schools have site-based decision-making committees where the administrators, the teachers, community members, and parents meet together and think about how can we improve the school. And this gives parents a direct voice apart from the PTA. Sometimes schools also have started to develop positive behavior interventions and support committees, PBIS committees. And these could be like the school having a reward for school-wide positive behavior or attendance goals. Maybe everyone gets to wear a school-appropriate but silly hat one day because 90% of the school was present and on time for that week. Or maybe because students with so many coupons for good behavior could maybe have a special privilege, like additional recess time, and the parents can help supervise that with the teachers. So parents can enjoy helping out their children and participating. So please find ways to incorporate them. So now I'm going to go into some specific ways to help students at the to help parents at the elementary level and also at the junior high and high school levels. So first of all, at the elementary level, make sure that you provide workshops for parents on effective reading strategies. Many parents don't really know how to read a book to students. They might just read it straightforward. But you want to teach parents how to do things like a picture walk where they preview the book and they flip through the pages and students make predictions about what they're going to read. And then they reevaluate those predictions at the end in the form of a conclusion where they refine their predictions into what really did happen in the story. Sometimes parents also don't know what kind of questions to ask their children to help them remember important facts from the book, like who was the main character, what was the main idea, what was the setting, what was your favorite part of the book, why, how would you have done things differently? And you could do the same thing for math as well. So you can teach parents how to help their children with their math homework, how to make sure that they write out steps and that they help their children go through the process of math. And maybe have some guided questions parents can ask their children. Each time they answer a question, like what was the question asking? How did you answer it? Why? How can you check your work? How can you determine if your answer is reasonable? What did you learn from this problem? So there's questions that parents can ask, and that could be for all subjects. So think of suggestions for how parents can help their children. Also provide some form of reward in your classroom for reading, so students reading at home or certain math practice activities. If students are practicing their multiplication facts or their addition and subtraction facts and they've mastered them, it's important to reward students, and you can reward them and also send home a letter to the parents thanking them for your support. Many schools have family liaisons that actually provide additional classes for parents on things like nurturing, positive discipline, child development, self-esteem, drug prevention, health education, nutrition, college and career readiness. So as a teacher, you need to talk to that family liaison or the school counselor, and maybe even send a friendly email to your district's department that's in charge of parent involvement or parent and community involvement. Find out ways and what kind of class activities and what kind of development opportunities and trainings parents could attend to better help their children. You also can make parents aware of opportunities for them to improve their own academic skills. So maybe you could encourage parents to attend ESL classes, English as a Second Language classes. There might be citizenship classes for parents that are working on their citizenship. There could be computer skills classes or GED classes for parents who are still working to get their high school diploma. There could also be small business classes for parents who want to start a small business. There's different classes throughout the community that can help parents. And if you make yourself aware of those and share those with the parents, that can grow parents' own academic and professional capacity, and that will allow them to be better at helping their own children. And if they're better at helping their own children, then the children themselves will be better in school and have more academic success. Now let's talk about parental involvement in high school. And many of the same things apply, so you want to make sure you encourage high school parents to also attend those classes and to build their capacity as teachers for their own children and also their capacity as professionals. Another thing is, just because students are in high school does not mean that you should, or junior high, does not mean that you should not communicate regularly with parents. Parents appreciate that. So you want to make sure you regularly communicate with parents, especially if the minute students start to struggle academically, not when it's too late, when they've already started failing the class and it might even be beyond repair. You don't want to contact them then to remind them that, hey, your child needs summer school, your child didn't pass my class. You want to contact them right away when you notice the student is struggling. Another thing is you want to make sure that you hand deliver things like report cards or even do home visits with the administrator or other school staff if you're concerned that parents aren't getting the information. So sometimes, especially the older students if they're really mischievous and crafty, they might find ways to prevent their parents from getting their report cards or hearing the message or getting the communication. So if you're not really hearing back from the parents or you see no results from the parents, then it might be important that you pay parents a home visit. And make sure you do that, of course, according to your district guidelines and with your administrator support. Also, continue to offer workshops and classes for parents. If your district doesn't offer classes on things like college applications, financial aid applications, career jobs or professional jobs that students could intern at during the summer, or different extracurricular activities on campus. If your school district's not providing those trainings, you should provide those trainings to your parents. And once again, try to make contact and make friends with the family liaisons or the social workers in your class, in your district, or your counselors. That way you can provide support for parents. So if you know parents need additional training on a specific topic, like financial aid, or maybe you know parents are going through a rough patch economically, you can try to find resources for them. But the first step is to make yourself aware of those resources so that you can better support parents, so that parents can better support their own children. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.